So what I want to do is first briefly tell you who the panel's on the panel and then let them introduce themselves. Our panelists are Marissa Brookes from Political Science, Dario Kusmanovic from RED, the Research and Economic Development, Juliet McMullin from Anthropology, Matt King from Religious Studies, and Stephen Sohn from English. So Marissa, why don't you say who you are and what your research is, and then we'll go around the room, and then I'll come back and ask you a few questions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. My name is Marissa Brookes. I'm assistant professor in political science, and I study the politics of work and employment.
You're not assistant.
Oh, associate now. I'm sorry why you're shaking your head. Maybe I pronounced my name wrong or something. Right. Just recently tenured. Thanks.
Dario, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, congratulations, Marissa. My name is Dario Kusmanovic, and I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor at the Office of Research Integrity in RED, which is Research and Economic Development Office, and that is kind of the central research compliance office for the campus.
Juliet?
Hi, I'm Juliet McMullin. I'm a professor of anthropology, and my work looks at health disparities in community engaged research. And
Matt?
Hi.
I just wanted to congratulate Marissa again.
Yeah, congratulations, Marissa. My name is Matt King. I'm an associate professor in religious studies. I work in Buddhist studies, but specifically on the social history of knowledge in Inner Asia, so Siberia, Mongolia, and Tibet.
And finally, Stephen Sohn.
Hi. Also, congrats, Marissa. I am a professor of English. My current book is on the Korean War. I'm looking at Korean American life writings in response to the Korean War. Good.
So what we're interested in this panel is the kinds of problems and roadblocks people are finding to their research now that there are various things that we're used to doing, like traveling, meeting with community groups, doing interviews, going to archives, that we can't do. And we thought it would be a good idea for people to discuss what roadblocks they're finding and what the workarounds that they're trying to come up with to continue to do their research, or whether they're rejuggling their research, rethinking their research, etc. So I thought we would just go around the panelists and they could talk about what they're doing, then turn to Dario for some more information and tips, and then open it up to the full audience. So Marissa, do you want to start?
Sure. Should I just talk about my research and some workarounds? I mean, is there Q&A, or I'll just talk and you stop me. So as I mentioned, I study the politics of work and employment, but what I'm really interested in is international labor and workers' movements across countries. So that means I do a lot of field work, and my focus is on qualitative methods. Right now, we're at a time when you can't do a lot of field work, so plans I had for the summer and early fall are now canceled, and that's field research in other countries where you go and interview people, or around here in the United States, and mostly what I do is interview people and sometimes work in archives. So as I'm working on my second book project, I have been, thrown a bit of a curveball, like all of you have, in terms of my research. So a few things that I've thought of as workarounds and suggestions colleagues have given me. One obvious one is to do interviews through Skype or Microsoft Office or one of those other maybe more secure than Zoom platforms. Those of you who do interview research know that you need the intimacy of face-to-face contact, so it's better than the phone, but it's still not good enough, right? Because there's something about spontaneously getting a coffee with somebody, being able to, snowball with the interview. Someone happens to walk by the office you're in, right? So for now, it's working okay. I would say those of us who do this type of research, though, still need to ensure the university doesn't cut out funding for travel once it's safe to travel post-pandemic, whenever we have a vaccine, whenever, you know, it is safe. But, you know, that is one workaround. Another one, which my colleague Kim Yi Dion in the political science department suggested to me, is a little bit, it sounds a little bit more invasive, but I think it's also doable. So she studies African politics and has suggested that, you know, research participants that you would normally visit in person through participant observation, doing deep ethnography, if you can't go there and observe people doing what they do, you might be able to ask them to, say, record voice memos periodically on WhatsApp and send them securely to you, the PI. And it could be, so I study workers, maybe there is a strike or a demonstration or they're organizing something. Normally I would try to go there, embed myself in the movement and talk to them. If I can't though, I might ask if they can record little memos throughout the day, or I might use a more structured questionnaire. And what's great about a recording as opposed to like a survey or a diary is that sometimes people, especially people who feel like they are not being heard, might want to be heard. And it's easy to kind of just pick up your phone and say, hey, note to self, you know, the demonstration went poorly today. I thought there would be more people there. Or, wow, management did this. Or maybe it is management that you're interviewing. Wow, the warehouse workers, they really had something planned today, right? Having someone record a voice memo, it's not a substitute for an interview. It's certainly not a substitute for deep ethnography. But I think that's something that might be able to work as a workaround. And then, of course, having your research participants journal, like assuming you've already established contact with them, right? Having them journal or write a short diary, or even doing a really simple questionnaire can get you that primary source data that you otherwise would have gotten had you been able to travel in the field. So those are just some of the ideas that I've had and that other people have had for workarounds. And then, of course, with archives, that's trickier unless you can afford to hire maybe a local research assistant who can go there and photograph archives for you. Maybe some of our colleagues can speak to that. Not everything is digital, right? As a lot of us know, you have to fly to the other country. So again, it's kind of a balance right now with workarounds, I feel, with my own research, and really fighting for being able to travel once it's safe again, right? Looking for the funding. And then another thing I just want to say briefly is, maybe that's it for now. Maybe I'll wait till the Q&A. I feel like I've been talking a lot. Okay, well, let me just say this really briefly. It's not to discourage you from working on the projects you had planned, but I feel like now is a good time. If you had some R&Rs that you meant to get to, or maybe like me, you're really interested in writing methods papers that don't require field work, that don't require the types of research facilities that you needed before, great time to develop your methods paper, right? Or a theoretical section of something. So consider switching to other projects, at least for the next few months. And then finally, a third thing I've thought was, well, we can really do something to connect with the pandemic right now. And a lot of us are focusing our research on COVID-19. So I was fortunate to be invited by Ellen Reese in sociology to join an application for a multi-campus initiative with other UCs to study the impact, hopefully, of COVID-19 on work and employment in the Inland Empire. So I am interested mainly in international issues, but given the times, it really kind of made sense to put some energy toward other projects, right? So funding for COVID things, projects that you maybe had on the back burner, especially fun methods papers, and workarounds with interviews, with Skype, Zoom, and possibly consider the diary thing, possibly consider the voice memo to WhatsApp method. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Juliet, I think Juliet is an important voice here because she does a lot of community research, and it's not clear how you do that when you can't get in the community. So Juliet?
Yeah, so research, particularly community engaged research, is messy even under the best of conditions, right? And so right now it's particularly complicated. But I do, you know, listening to Marissa, I do have the advantage that most of my community partners are right here in the Inland Empire. And, you know, so I don't have to think about, you know, how can I fly there? But we do have to think about how we connect with people. And oftentimes, internet connections are not that great. And especially in the Coachella Valley, right? It has one of the worst connectivity issues around. So, you know, if we're thinking that we just want to connect with people in the normal digital way, sometimes those work and sometimes they don't. You may notice that I have bad internet connection as well, so I might freeze partway through this. And there's been times when we're talking with our community, and because they don't have internet connection, my project coordinator and I are just staring at a number of blocks that are just telephones, right? Because people are calling in then. So just sort of rewinding a little bit to share a bit with you about what the research is that we're doing and this kind of messy experience that we're having. I think about it in a number of different ways. One is from my own community engaged project, which is the Gathering of Good Minds. And we've been working with Riverside San Bernardino Indian Health and some of the tribes there and building a historical trauma curriculum. And so it's, you know, based on tons of interviews and really collaboratively working with everyone about what should be included, how does the curriculum, what does the curriculum look like? How do we disseminate it? And then I also have the role as the co-director for the new Health Disparities Research Center, as well as the co-lead for the Community Engagement and Dissemination Core, and then as department chair. So there's all these different ways that research is being changed with all of the people that I'm interacting with at all of these levels. And one of the things that I have to say is that sharing resources and collaborating has been one of the saving pieces for all of the projects that we're doing. And I want to thank Catherine Rodriguez, Jennifer Syvertson on the Center for Health Disparities project, as well as Wyatt Kelly from our Gathering of Good Minds project. Without their help, we just couldn't get through all of the things that we need to get through and connect with all of the people that we want to connect with. So sharing resources, collaborating has really been a source of support and a guiding principle. The other guiding principle that I've had to think a lot about is the overwhelming number of funding opportunities that are happening right now. So many of them around COVID. And when this first happened, we didn't want to jump in there and just sort of say, oh, we should apply for funding, we should apply for funding. And sort of respecting what it is that people needed in this moment. And so we started looking around to see what other people were doing and who already had resources and how could we share what was going on to meet the immediate needs of our communities. And, you know, there's so many people already doing great work and building resources. So we just decided that in terms of our community engagement core, that first we were going to share resources. And we didn't want to go after funding opportunities. And part of that also, that decision had to do with a reading that our Faculty Commons group did last year around anti-oppressive research methodologies. And in that reading, we learned that the Latin meaning of data is a gift, right? A thing given. So what are the responsibilities and obligations that we have to the people that we work with, that we do research with, if they're giving us this precious gift, right? And so we didn't want to think, we want to think about data as a gift and not as an opportunity. And so that was another sort of guiding principle that helped us make the decisions about what opportunities we should look into and what we should just put to the side. So our group, I just want to share one project. Our group actually has been keeping on with a number of projects that didn't require us necessarily to go out into the field. But one project that we did decide to take on is related to COVID-19. And, you know, it comes from that fact that Latinos and Black communities are experiencing some of the highest rates of death and contracting COVID-19. And the data is not available, right? Some states are not releasing data. Some counties are not releasing data if they're even collecting the data at all. And, you know, so this is a piece where we can actually contribute and give back. And so we started thinking about, well, what does that look like in this moment? How do we get information about the disparities that are happening within our communities right here? And so we decided to create a project where we would start just with families and friends. So people who wanted to have that conversation with their families and friends about what they were experiencing. And the first few people that we spoke to about the project, they just gave us so many stories, and they're saying, yes, you need to do this. Same with one of our partners, HARC, Health Assessment in Coachella Valley. We ran it past them too to say, should we even be doing this? You know, do people want us asking them these questions? And they were so excited, and so they started telling us about other people that we should be included. And to Marissa's point, right, sometimes people who aren't heard, their voices aren't being heard, this is an opportunity for them to share what's going on in their lives and to really give life to the disparities that are happening. So we decided to go that route. It's under IRB review right now because there are typically concerns about interviewing your own family members and friends. So we've been trying to work around that by being honest with the people that we would talk with, you know, just saying this is a concern. Like, we don't want to be coercive because you're my family member, but, you know, is this something that you want to share? And if not, you know, you walk away and the conversation is done. So thinking about those kinds of issues, but everyone we talk to is excited about the possibility. So maybe Dario can shed light if that's acceptable or not. So, you know, so that's one thing that's moving forward. And then I don't know if you want to know more, maybe you can ask me more questions about the Gathering of Good Minds project. There's been little bumps in the road, but it's, one piece though that we did have to stop completely was interviews with physicians because they were just busy on the front lines and we couldn't do that kind of work. And so very rarely have we had a situation where we just had to not do something. And this was one of those situations. And then finally, I just wanted to mention something about being department chair in this moment. And oftentimes, we're having a lot of questions with our graduate students because, you know, they don't know always at the very beginning in their first or second year that research is messy and ugly. And that this moment has completely transformed what they might be doing. And so how do we, you know, talk through those moments and guide them through their potential dissertation research project? And then also for our graduate students who are finishing now, you know, what are their job prospects and what does research look like for them as they're trying to move out onto the job market? And so, you know, those are more questions than answers, but it is something that we've been facing. And I think it's important for us to really think about, again, how our research practices are something that can move us out of the status quo into health equity, into social justice, but something that works every day to change how we interact with each other. So that's it. I think you're muted, Georgia.
Matt? Sorry.
Sure, thank you. Well, my current book project is examining the circulation of humanist knowledge from Europe into Inner Asia in the 1830s. Scarily enough, in the midst of a cholera epidemic that spread from China to Europe and then to North America, and actually killed one of the protagonists of my book. And so this spring I intended to be in Paris, actually, at an archive, and then in Russia in the East Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And then later this summer back in Mongolia. And so, of course, those plans have all changed. And luckily, though, for me, I have some colleagues at those institutions, and I'm hopeful that once they turn the lights on there, long before I can travel, that I might be able to get some of the most important documents outside of the usual channels, and my book can keep going. The delays aren't really going to be that catastrophic for me, and I have a sympathetic publisher. But what I wanted to bring up today actually really relates to what Juliet mentioned right at the end of her presentation, which is the way that this pandemic has posed obstacles and required creative solutions with graduate students and undergraduate students who I'm supervising. They, of course, are far less flexible in the timeframes of their work. They've been preparing quite a while to really get a lot done this summer, and this is the place that I've been having to confront COVID obstacles the most. So let me just raise a couple of the solutions we came up with. So, you know, beyond the rather forbidding pragmatic issues of undertaking field research when students and their informants literally cannot share the same air, how do we help our students adapt their entire projects, and in fact the entire their sense of the scholars they want to become so dramatically changed by this pandemic? How do we help them through that process as we ourselves are kind of needing to think on our heels? So for example, at the moment I have 2 doctoral students and 1 undergraduate doctoral student who are all diligently preparing to undertake ethnographic fieldwork this summer in Buddhist contemplative communities. 1 graduate student, 1 undergraduate student planned on focusing most on inland empire communities, while this other graduate student was planning to work in a transnational community spread between Southern California and Myanmar. Each of these students were originally interested in exploring how instruction, kind of public instruction and contemplative practices, produced secular public space at the intersection of class, gender, and race. In contexts as diverse as Thai Buddhist temples in Riverside, or Dharma addiction recovery groups, prison meditation groups, and Vipassana 10-day retreats, these students were planning to learn more about how embodied practices of meditation negotiated this sort of the negotiation of history and community, basically, in these various settings. Now, that was in March. So in the midst of this pandemic, each of these students have rather quickly refocused their summer plans, and in some cases, their entire research program and the sort of scholar they hope to become. Each has now centered the role of technologically mediated group contemplative practice as their field site, their sort of slightly unorthodox ethnographic field site. Each has made their primary topic Buddhist contemplative exercises as responses to the COVID pandemic, not only issuing from temple halls or library basements in the Inland Empire, but in YouTube addresses, Instagram TV events, and chat rooms without place as such, yet linking informant communities to one another between Riverside and Dharamsala, and Seoul, Los Angeles, and London and Tokyo, and in radically new ways, quite unimaginable even 2 months ago. So something that's come up quite regularly for me as I've gone through these emergency sessions with these students, helping them stay on track, is something that I've always remembered reading Michel de Certeau, which is that we must allow our fields to bite back. to require disciplinary knowledge to respond to and not determine our primary sources. And so in the wake of this pandemic, the students I'm supervising this summer, and in some cases for years to come and years prior, will all be leaving their programs as scholars of Buddhist inflective contemplative practices, of digital and networked community and religion, and in the health humanities in one way or another, quite unlike their plans even weeks ago. And so I think, though, that in some ways this will be to their advantage. They'll be experts in some corner of the fast developing cultural mechanics of what will hopefully be a post-COVID world. They may help us innovate new analytical frames and research methodologies in the humanities and social sciences, appropriate to field sites that are at once as vast as our networked world and as small as our quarantined iPhone. And so that's where my students are. They actually seem a little inspired by the challenge and not as scared as they were weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Okay, I don't have anything earth-shattering to add to the conversation, but I will give you my experiences and what I've gone through. I know probably a number of you have to work with archives. For me, my project has taken me to post-armistice published works that were coming out in the late 50s and early 60s. Some of those have required me to go to various archives in the Midwest, in the LA area, and then in New York City. And so COVID obviously presented that problem. The latest one that I needed to go to was in New York City, which is probably the worst place to go to right now. So the workaround that I had that most of you probably already know, but maybe don't know, I mean, maybe you don't all know, but for me, I have a contact librarian at UCR, Carla Arbegi, who is amazing. And usually if there's anything I've needed online, she can find it. And my number one resource, I think, in this time of not being able to access libraries and not being able to go to the archives is the librarian network that I have. Carla, for instance, cued me into something called Happy Trust, which allows us access to many, many different online archives which we've never had before. One of which for me was the online archives for Harper's Bazaar. I needed to get a short story in an issue that was published, I believe, in 1957, and she alerted me to the fact that some of that archive was available online. Now, obviously, there's limits to what is available online. As Marissa pointed out earlier, I will speak to the fact that I think that one workaround for the future that did work for me prior to COVID, which I think other people will be able to use as there are phased reopenings and libraries start to open up, is that I did hire a graduate student to scan materials at an archive that I wasn't sure about had the materials that I really needed. And actually that was surprisingly cost effective in ways that I didn't even anticipate. The hourly rate wasn't too bad. And then it saved me all of the travel costs to go there. And actually it made it so that everything that I needed archive-wise, at least from what I could tell, was available in what that graduate student scanned. So I think that could be definitely a method that people can use once there's a limited number of people allowed in libraries. And that's probably the only other workaround that I can think of. So I'll stop there.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to turn it over to Dario now, who I think may be more used to dealing with problems with natural scientific research, but we wanted to make sure that people were aware of the travails and tips that we have on this side of campus as well. So, Dario.
Thank you very much. So I am aware that there's a significant portion of people in this room who would consider themselves humanists. So I will structure my remarks accordingly. The central function of my office is something called Institutional Review Board. And some of you do have to submit protocols to the IRB for review and approval, but some of you do not. Some of the scholarly activities are outside of the purview of the IRB, but we have had more people who have reached out to our office for kind of guidance and assistance because COVID has impacted some of these scholarly activities. And it's really great to hear the panel speak about some of the creative solutions and things you have come up with to deal with during this very difficult time. So in case you don't know, the campus is going to be implementing a phased approach that will be heavily influenced by county, state, and the federal guidance. So that's why it makes it difficult to talk about anything in kind of firm terms. But we are looking at some kind of a phased approach. I think for the next while, it's safe to say that research and scholarly activities will look very different, and you've seen some examples in terms of people leaning more on technology and kind of trying to find creative solutions to work on methods paper or use the time to apply for grants. Some of the things that the campus is implementing is the number one guiding principle is that we are here to protect the health and safety of the people who are engaging in scholarly activities and research. That is going to be the guiding principle as we kind of contemplate any kind of a return to work. The other idea is that in terms of the faculty members who are most vulnerable, there's been a recognition that the early stage researchers are most vulnerable. So again, congratulations, Marissa. But there will be a focus that campus will be doing to protect those faculty members. And then there are some principles that they have started implementing in terms of how that will be done. Some of you have also mentioned undergraduate students. One of the things is that undergraduates are students first, but researchers second. And this primarily actually applies to laboratory research where undergraduate students could be performing some tasks. And the idea here is to focus on ensuring that, they're meeting their obligations in getting their degree. But if there are other things that are outside of that in terms of laboratory work or taking care of, the stored gases or anything, I know this is not the group that would involve, but that comes second to their education. Universities are not a great place for kind of chain of command issues, but during a pandemic, everything kind of goes through a chain of command. So a lot of decisions are made at the dean level. So for those of you who are in CHAS, the deans are the ones who are going to be implementing a granting process in terms of how many people can access, if there are any archives within the schools, or if there are any spaces that are used for scholarly activities. So that all is being implemented at the dean level. So I'll stop now. I'll just highlight some things that are here to stay. And again, this is whether you're doing human subjects research or whether you're doing other scholarly activities such as going to archives. But social distancing is going to be the norm for the next foreseeable future. We need to think about how do we deal with whether it's obtaining free and informed consent if you have to wear a mask, or how do you do that effectively if you're doing it through Zoom or some kind of another medium like that. There's going to be limits in terms of how many people can be congregating in an office or a library, as some of people have mentioned. For at least the time being, we're strongly encouraging people to use secure virtual technologies whenever possible. Finally, some people do work with groups that are considered more at risk for COVID-19, and it's important that there are extra protections granted. So again, not in the humanities, but we have people who do research with individuals who are looking at cognition and aging. So, these are people in their 80s and 90s and so on. So these are obviously very vulnerable groups. So that research is probably going to be the last type of research that will see a full return, because we are trying to ensure that there are protections for people who are very vulnerable to COVID-19. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Does anyone on the panel further thoughts before we open it up for questions and observations from the audience? Okay, let me see if I can do this. Do we have questions? If you have a question or a comment, a tip, a travail, let us know. You can raise your hand, I think. You should be able to raise your hand and I should be able to see you. We had a question that I think was answered about, shoot, I have no memory. I'm sorry. Let me look up this question again. Dear, sorry. What about traveling? Does the University, Dario, have any ideas about traveling?
Yeah, so for travel, again, it's even more complicated than because in addition to thinking about the guidance that we have here in Riverside, you do have to think about, I mean, some of the places traveled were mentioned were Italy, France. You also have to consider the public health guidance in those other relevant countries. So as part of this plan in terms of ramping up or ramping down scholarly activities and research on campus, there is some broad considerations given to travel, and then studies that we call field studies. Again, most people in the humanities will not be doing what we think of as field studies. This is, you go to the Sahara Desert to look at the lizards, and so we call those just field studies. But for travel, you will have to consider the guidance, public health guidance in terms of international travel. I'm assuming that provided that you're, following that, you should be okay to resume these kinds of scholarly activities, provided that you can access the archives that you need to access and so on. Good,
thank you. Eric Johns has a question.
I was just about to type it in the chat, but so I'm about to finish my dissertation, and as I'm editing things, and I'm realizing there's a few things that I'm missing that I haven't been able to get through HathiTrust or the library, and it's kind of, it's bothering me. So any kind of words of advice about what I can do now that I've been putting all these years into this one piece of this body of work that I feel is now incomplete from something that's beyond my control? Any words of advice of how to frame it mentally or what I can do within the text itself would be appreciated. Thank you.
I think there's some librarians in our session. Does a librarian want to answer this?
Yeah, the librarians have been very, very helpful for me so far, but not for some things, unfortunately. HathiTrust has been amazing, but probably opening up too many cans of worms that I don't need at this stage. But it's the things that aren't there that are driving me nuts.
Yeah, I've had the same problem. There's this one thing I can't get. And whenever I go on Google Books, precisely the pages I need are not there. And they don't have page numbers anyway, so you can't really figure out what's going on. We have another question or a comment from Pat Ordonez. Is she there?
Hi, yes. I have this little cover thing on my camera for protection. Thanks everyone for all the good information. I'm a PhD candidate in the Graduate School of Education. And so I really appreciated the concern for early scholars like us who are I'm in the stage where I'm trying to figure out how to get into a site. So a lot of my research is ethnographic case study research methods. And because I'm in the field of education, a lot of the sites that me and my colleagues are trying to get into are schools, which they have their own IRB processes, and COVID kind of just, for everyone's protection as well, I'm guessing that there would be limiting of our access to schools now, And so I think like for the field of education, we're impacted because people are trying to protect like, you know, minors, community students. And so like I'm having to rethink how to enter the site if we're even going to be allowed to. Schools are closed down right now, I think for the fall, especially the site that I'm looking at. And so I guess like my main concern is like, I guess I'm just trying to share my concern and trying to see if there are like tips out there. I know that, let's see here. I know that it was brought up by, let's see, Dr. Brookes, right? To get maybe like more intricate questionnaires or voice messages, but I don't know how that would work with high school students, honestly. And so I don't know if there are other ways besides trying to revamp my whole dissertation proposal.
Yeah, it helps if you've already established contact and these are research participants with whom you've already been working. And these times too, with the questionnaire, sometimes the less elaborate, the better, knowing that your research participants are going to be under a ton of stress and have a lot of extra that they're holding on to in the meantime. But yeah, there are ways.
Yeah, so just, Pat, this is sometimes a question that gets brought to the IRB. So we don't control really whether a school lets you in, but some of the things that work well in the past, and I don't see it changing now, I mean, I do see some restrictions from school, is do they see a benefit in what you're trying to do for their students, like a direct benefit? And you might have a great project and a great idea, but if they don't see a benefit, a direct benefit to their high school students, they're not going to let you in to do that research. And same thing during COVID. I mean, Juliet mentioned there's a lot of funding opportunities for COVID, but at the same time, this is also a good time perhaps to be, if it makes sense for your research, to be doing research on this. And I think those kinds of things are more likely to let a school district let you in to perform the research project than if it was something that they don't see the utility in. So that's the best answer I can give you at this time.
Thanks for the IRB knowledge. I'm actually filling it out right now. So, and then I guess like a second question to that, do you, I guess as scholars, do you foresee, for example, ethnographic research sites and also like schools, do you foresee us coming back in the spring, and would we just be working in a world that's like post-COVID, everything's digital? And that would inevitably force a lot of like early scholars like us to just rewrite everything.
So I'm not a scholar, so I won't answer that part, but I will say that I don't see there's not, if you talk about return in the fall as like a normal return, no, that's for sure not going to happen. But some kind of a phased approach that considers the risk and gives people an opportunity to also, you know, do remote versus in-person, that's probably very likely. But that's the best I can answer, and I'll let the other scholars kind of take that part on.
I guess I would just also want to add that I am a huge proponent of writing research proposals and IRBs, you know, and having everything in order, because it's a guide, right, to keep you going. And sometimes you're in the field and it's like, oh, what was I supposed to do next? And you can go to your research proposal and say, oh, this is what I was supposed to do next. But the reality is that things change in the field all the time. It doesn't stay the same. And, you know, even my own dissertation, my questions switched because I was in the field and I was talking to people. And that's the reality. Like they're not necessarily interested in what you're interested in when you wrote your proposal. And so kind of being open to those changes and listening to what people are saying, you know, so maybe they are talking about COVID right now and that's the way to talk with the students, but maybe they're talking about something else, you know, so even taking the moment to hear what's going on and working that into your project. But I just want to say it will be okay, right? It will be okay because all of our projects change all the time. And so I don't know what your project will look like in the end. And it is a lot of work, but maybe you kind of go on that path with the openness to looking around and seeing what's happening and follow that. But it will be okay.
So I just want to read some of the questions that have come up from chat, and you can leap in and answer those that you want to answer and leave the rest to other people. So 2 questions have to do with the IRB process. What's happening with submitted IRB proposals? Is there any new info on the IRB process? Somebody else wants to know about having difficulty reaching respondents and how you might facilitate that. Another question has to do with dealing with the volume of digital stuff that we have now. So how do people deal with the volume of digital sources and keeping track of them now that we are especially reliant on them? And there are so many in each of our respective disciplines and the more specialized areas. And is the library cataloging them and or tracking them in any way? And then there is a response. There's an expanded resource, which I think everybody can see in chat. Anybody want to, and then there's a question about where one might find the increased funding calls, etc. So those are some of the questions that are coming up in chat.
I'll take the IRB ones. So IRB is fully operational at this time. We're fully remote and fully operational. We have our regularly scheduled meetings. But as you can imagine, and as Marissa and others have alluded, this is a great time for people to be working on IRB applications. So we have probably seen a 30 to 40% increase in the volume that our office is receiving. And as you can imagine, we did not receive a 30 or 40% increase in the staff or IRB members available. So our timelines have extended a bit, and we are prioritizing, much like every other UC, we are prioritizing COVID-19 research, but that doesn't mean it's going to be approved within a week or 2, right? Because there's just such a long queue. The COVID-19 related research does take priority. So our turnaround time used to be 4 weeks approximately. Now it's closer to 6 for an average review in the office. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then I saw some questions around any tips regarding projects submitted to the IRB during COVID-19. Because of this uncertainty, the things we're recommending is that people don't just write the IRB application with the expectation that everything's going back to normal on, I'm going to say December 1st, some arbitrary date. But you give yourself the flexibility where you, in your study procedures or recruitment procedures, where you're using, things that are not requiring, you to be present, perhaps the use of Zoom in addition to one-on-one interviews. So we're strongly encouraging people to incorporate those kinds of things in the IRB application if you do need review and approval at the IRB. And did I miss any of the IRB questions? No? Okay, I'll let others take the other questions that came up.
So one of the other questions was about reaching respondents. It's been difficult to reach respondents sometimes. Does anybody have any tips on that?
I guess I would want to know more, because we sort of have, you know, a process, how many times we reach out to them, who we might also reach out to, you know, but yeah, I would want to know more about the condition. So for us, you know, if someone's missing, because it's a community, and so everyone sort of knows, we just say, hey, have you seen so-and-so? But, you know, that may not work under all conditions, depending on who your participants are. I mean, the other thing that we've written into IRBs before is the secondary contact, you know, so getting approval. If you can't contact the first person, is there someone else that you can contact that would let them know? But usually we get approval for that because it means, you know, that someone else knows that you've been participating in the study and can give information about you. So again.
Yeah, I would also say give it more time for people to respond than normal, because people are under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. They will get to it, but our inboxes, right? I mean, depending on who your respondents are, they could have this mountain of email that you just get overwhelmed with, that you just can't get through. So if you're trying to contact somebody through email, assuming it's okay, try the phone. That maybe some people like, that's of course, but others might not consider, you know, a phone call might reach somebody better if you are able to. A text message, it's a lot easier to respond to a text. So if you're trying to reach out to people and email just isn't going, one, be patient, and two, you know, try some other things, even if you're maybe less comfortable picking up the phone right away, if that's allowed. But yeah, give it some time. People, I think, have these mountains of email. I know we all do. So I don't know, little patience, keep trying.
And what about so if somebody were interested in finding where the funding for COVID-related projects, is there a source for that?
So I can talk about, so the RED Research and Economic Development newsletter, which gets posted online as well, lists sources for COVID-19 research. There are funding opportunities for humanities and social sciences. So that's where you can find stuff around that. Juliet, you mentioned some as well through maybe the Health Disparities Group.
Yeah, sorry, I completely got dropped there. So there's, of course, because I do a lot of NIH funding, there's been a ton of NIH calls for COVID-19. We also have our own research center is calling for applications. So there's a special call, $50,000 for COVID-related research, along with our regular calls. So that's at the healthdisparities.ucr.edu. And then, so I've also seen funding from arts foundations. So over this time, I've sent in 3 different letters of intent. So we're hoping that we'll get asked for the full application, but one of them was for California Arts California Arts Council, and then another from Russell Sage Foundation, and of course NSF and all the big ones. They are all having special COVID calls. So, and I know Marissa said Ellen Reese is applying for some. So I just kind of assumed, you know, at first you think, oh, it's because I do health work that you're seeing all these calls. But then I hear from colleagues that they're also getting similar calls. It is quite overwhelming, honestly. But yeah, research funding definitely has picked up, which of course leads into Dario's office as well. So.
Marissa had a good idea about finding articles that you can't find even through the library's efforts, which is crowdsourcing. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I know a lot of grad students, for example, came to me and said because the UC system stopped subscribing to some journals, it's really hard to get articles. But I'm seeing a lot on Facebook. I know Facebook is for cool young people, don't use it anymore. But go back on and make friends, make a professional Facebook profile, friend all your academic friends who have friends at other universities. And these weak links, these people, maybe not, you know, tie number one, but 2 or 3 people down the chain, turns out their university subscribes to the International Journal of Money Laundering or whatever. And they are able to get you those articles. And people are being pretty nice right now. So I found it also with book chapters, where again, that's really often inaccessible unless you go to the library or have interlibrary loan. But there are people out there who say, oh yeah, I'm willing to, you know, photocopy with my phone or scan those chapters. I have that, you know? So go ahead and, you know, whatever social media you prefer, but make a profile if you have to on one of the lamer ones and friend your academic friends at other universities internationally and here, and you might be able to get resources that otherwise you couldn't access from UCR.
And what about networking? We have a question about networking. Any advice for building rapport with people in the field? If we're not able to travel to the sites, how will I build relationships with people remotely? Facebook.
I wanted to say that from the perspective of the students I'm working with who are doing this kind of research right now, they all faced obstacles in the way that Marissa said, where they're working on sort of institutions or communities. And usually the person answering the email that's listed after a Google search for that community is at best hesitant to start passing around a random UCR researcher's questionnaire to members of a community that might be facing all kinds of issues at this time. But being a little persistent and polite and patient and clear and trying to present what you're doing in different ways has led them all to make contact with folks in those communities, and the floodgates have opened. You know, plans for half-an-hour interviews have turned into 4 or 5, you know, hour-long conversations, and suddenly the contact information for friends of friends. And so it seems like that a little bit of persistence and politeness and clarity through the kind of gatekeeping portals to these communities goes a long way. And to not get discouraged if you're working on with communities, at least, you know.
Yeah, just to add to that too, social media is great, but be sincere and be honest when you connect with people. Most of us in the Zoom know this, but as a brief cautionary tale, my sister got a friend request from somebody, and they were talking online, totally fine, Facebook, and it was another woman, and they bonded over being a mom, and she thought they had built this good friendship, right? Which you might want to do when you're trying to embed yourself in a community. And it turned out this lady was part of a multi-level marketing scheme. And she started just, a little bit of pyramid selling, a little bit here and there. And then it just became clear that it was not sincere. Now, I know you aren't doing multi-level marketing, or if you are, then you are. But with research, don't embed yourself in an online community and look sincere and then spring a survey on them and say, oh, what can I get from you, right? I think Juliet made a good point. Dario made a good point, where it shouldn't be about getting something from them, right? So that can really burn some bridges if you come off as insincere and you're just trying to network for the sake of networking. Have something to offer, really care, really have the intention of building real bonds, depending on the type of research you do, but a real genuine connection, okay? So just don't be like that MLM person.
Other questions?
I just want to add that some of the things that we're seeing in my office right now, again, this is for research with human subjects, are some of the unique challenges that this new world is presenting in terms of, research that happens with people who are usually in kind of multi-generational homes. And then there needs to be an interview, and that interview is through Zoom. And how could that be done privately? This is something that requires a lot of thinking and kind of doing this kind of risk-benefit assessment of, Does it have to proceed at this time? Do all the questions that I anticipated asking really, are they really worth asking, given that the person is sharing a room with 3 other siblings, or siblings and grandparents? So we've been getting a lot of questions about, well, should I still do this research if this is kind of the situation? We kind of put it back. We tell you some of the best practices and put it back on the researcher, but it's up to you to make that assessment. And in some instances, it may not be the best thing to do if there's really no other kind of accommodations that can be made. So I just want to add that to yet another challenge of this kind of new world that we're in.
I want to point out that there's lots of very good information in the chat too. Gracia Perez says, I also continued building my relationship networks with folks. I work through WhatsApp and phone calls. I sent and called people in early March to check in, especially those that have hosted me in rural Mexico. And then Jeff Taylor says, just ask your participants, ask what would work best for them. They are your best resource. So I think, I'm not sure what happens to the chat, but I think there's a lot of good information in the chat thing. I wish I was better at this Zoom business. But I think, are there other questions? Summing up? Anybody want to sum up?
I won't sum up.
Okay.
I will. I suspect that there's a lot of graduate student stress about their projects, and I hear that and I get it. One thing that I would really strongly suggest that all graduate students, no matter their stage of their dissertation writing or just in graduate school, you need to reach out either to faculty members on your committee or the graduate director of your department to make your concerns known, because there may be evaluative changes that need to be made if this COVID crisis continues to alter how we do research. And so those conversations need to happen early, and they need to happen openly, so that you can progress through the program in a way that's fair to you. So I would really advocate for you to reach out to your committees and to faculty members in your department about your concerns.
Yeah, that's a great point. Some of the questions we've been getting in my office, in addition to the ones I mentioned, have been to do with, for example, let's say I can do this study with 50 people, but now I may have to reduce the number of people in the study to 30. Is that okay? That's not really an IRB issue we want to know, or human subjects protections issue, but that you should be engaging with the conversation with your faculty advisor or your thesis committee about perhaps if it makes sense to scale down your research project because you can only recruit 20 people at this time. And what kind of changes need to be made to your project is not just an IRB issue, but this is something that you need to be talking to your advisors and kind of communicating, and how can you alter your research project to kind of meet this reality. So the IRB is being very flexible with things. Obviously, the participant protection is our #1 priority, but there are other things here to think about. Our graduate students, all of us are feeling the stress of this, and we want to be as flexible and as reasonable as the situation requires. So that's a great point, Stephen. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I would just want to build on that, this whole thing is moment for us is about relationship building, right? So you're not only building relationships with potential participants of your studies and field sites, but also you're building the relationship between you and your faculty member, you and your other colleagues. Like I said, fortunately I'm in this each other in what we're doing. Oh, did I get lost?
Yeah, you froze. Can you back up a bit?
Anyway, yeah, so just, that's at the core of everything that we're doing. Keep talking with people and building those relationships. And maybe there's not as many people in your study, but the relationships can be more in depth, right? You know, quality over quantity.
I have found out that we will save the chat and can share it with everyone. So there's a lot of good resources in the chat. And we'll also be sharing the recording for anyone who wants to see it again or came in late or missed something. And we're going to have additional talks in this series, like the one we had last week and this week. We're calling them all UCR versus COVID. In next week or early the week after, we'll be having one from the student perspective, what kinds of things students are facing and what kinds of solutions are out there for them. Anything else? So look out for that one. And thank you all very much. And as Juliet has been stressing, we are a community and we're all here for you and for everyone. So let us know what you need. We can have more of these video sessions on, or Zoom sessions on whatever concerns come up, for which crowdsourcing will be helpful. So thank you, everyone, and stay well and stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Georgia and Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you.